This rather showy table here, looks like it's come from a cafe, doesn't mean that I'm going to give a demonstration on how to mix cocktails. Alright, so we start in the middle of the night, with only the moonlight. A man is moving silently around a palace. He moves from room to room. He moves into a bedroom, and there in the bedroom is a woman lying with a young child. The young child is his newly born son. The woman is his wife. They are both sleeping. He looks at them intently for several moments, and then he turns, goes down the stairs and swiftly leaves the palace. He finds his horse waiting there and rides away. The man is Siddhartha Gautama. He is the son of the king, the monarch, in a small principality in northern India. The time is 2,500 years ago. When he was born, when Siddhartha was born, his father called together a number of very wise and learned sages. And as was common at this time, and is still common in some parts of India today, the job of these sages is to examine the child and make a prophecy. So what they do is they look at the child, they look at his facial features, any particular marks, how long his ears are, how long his nose are, and so on. And on the basis of what they see, they make a prophecy. And the prophecy that they make is this. They say to the king, Siddhartha's father, this child will be a great ruler, a great monarch, greater than you. He will rule wisely, and he'll be a very important man. Or, on the other hand, he will be a spiritual leader. So Siddhartha's father, being like most ambitious parents, knows what he wants. He wants his son to be wealthy, have status, and have power. So he is determined that the first of these prophecies comes true. He is absolutely determined that his son is going to be a great monarch, greater than him. So he has a little think about how he's going to ensure that Siddhartha grows up to be a great monarch. And the conclusion he comes to is that he has to protect Siddhartha from any suffering, any uneasiness, anything a little bit distasteful. And he wants to surround Siddhartha with beautiful things, beautiful clothes, beautiful food, and beautiful people. And in his mind, if he does this, then Siddhartha won't be tempted to follow the spiritual life. So he wants to protect Siddhartha from suffering. He's a protective parent. So this is Siddhartha's early life, a life full of pleasure, a life full of good clothes, good food, endless entertainment. Sounds terrible, doesn't it? At the age of 16, Siddhartha marries an equally young and beautiful woman called Yashodhara. But although Siddhartha has been given the best things in life by his father, there's growing an underlying sense of dissatisfaction. particularly with the life that he's leading. And a number of particular events add to this dissatisfaction. So I'm going to describe these events. So for most of his time, Siddhartha lives in the palace. His father doesn't really want him to go into the local town because it's full of there's poor people, you know, things like this. But Siddhartha, although he's a very sensitive and kindly young man, has an iron will. And eventually he persuades his father to let him go into the local town and see what goes on, see what the ordinary people are up to. So his father eventually agrees, and the condition is that he goes into the town. On the first occasion he goes in disguised with his servant. His servant's name is Channa. So Channa and Siddhartha go into town disguised, so they don't look like, he doesn't look like a prince, which he is. So we go into town, they wander around, and they see, or Siddhartha sees, an old man. And the old man is described in the scriptures in detail. So I'll just read this description out. So as the young prince was going through the street, all of a sudden, from a small hut beside the road, out came an old man with long silver grey hair, wearing very old, torn and dirty rags. The skin of his face was dried and wrinkled. His sunken eyes were dim and he was almost blind. There were no teeth in his mouth. He stood up, trembling all over, almost bent over double, and clutching at a shaking stick with two bent and skinny hands to save himself from falling, the old beggar drags himself along the street, paying no attention to the people around him. He speaks very feebly, begging people around him to give him food, as if he would die that very day if he did not eat. So he's definitely an old man. So in the legend, this is the first time Siddhartha has seen an old man. I don't buy the story, quite honestly. I'm sure that in the palace there are old men. But what I think is happening here is Siddhartha is really, really coming face to face, in a sense, with his own mortality. He's coming face to face with the fact that, although he is 16 years old, that is not going to last forever. And this is something that is sometimes hard to accept, isn't it? You've probably realised that I'm over 30. But despite that, I don't really see myself as getting old, or even being old. I know in my head that that is the case. But there's that bit of me that still wants to be, well, if not 18, maybe 26. You know. And if you saw some of my clothes and some of my things, you would wonder what was going on. So there's a bit of me that just doesn't want to get old. Doesn't imagine I'm really going to get old. Yes, I know people get old, but it probably is going to happen to you more than it happens to me. So there's that reluctance, isn't there, on our part to accept our own mortality, accept our own ageing process. We may be beautiful young people, for some of us, for some of you, but it's not going to last forever. But that's not the end of it. Siddhartha then persuades his father he wants to go into town again, despite having this shock of seeing this decrepit old man. He wonders what else is out there, what else is in this town that I don't know about. So him and Channa go back into town on another occasion. And this time they see a sick man, a man who is ill. And again, this man is described very graphically. The man is lying on the ground. He's twisting his body. He's holding his stomach and crying out in pain at the top of his voice. All over his face and body are purple patches. His eyes are rolling and he is gasping for breath. So young Siddhartha has never seen anyone like this before. His father has made sure he doesn't. But here he sees this man writhing in pain, obviously exceedingly ill. First he doesn't know what he's looking at, so he rushes over to the man and tries to comfort the man. The man can't respond, the man just cries in pain. He grasps the man and holds the man. At this point, Channa, who is a little more streetwise, gasps out in horror. Come back, Siddhartha. This man may have the plague. This man may have some terrible infectious disease. Leave him alone, for goodness sake. So Siddhartha is quite taken aback by this sight. And again, I'm sure Siddhartha has himself perhaps had a cold or something. I mean, India 2,500 years ago must be there must have been lots of disease and illness. But I remember an incident in my own life about 10 years ago. I mean, for most of my life, I think I've been in hospital about one day in my life. Then, about 10 years ago, my wife complained of a pain in her leg. So, pains in leg, that's not a big deal, is it? It got worse. She said, I need to go to A&E. What? Eventually I took her, and over the next few weeks her body started to, well, her nervous system started to destroy itself. She had a rare and unusual disease in which the autoimmune system just goes wrong, and the body literally starts to destroy the nervous system. So her body stopped functioning. She lost feeling in her legs stopped moving, her arms stopped moving. She was unable to feed herself, almost unable to eat. And I think what was shocking to me about this was when I talked to the doctors about it, they could give it a name, but no more. There is no cure, and we just had to sit and wait with the consequences of what was going on. And that was really I was going through what Siddhartha does. I was really kind of staring sickness in the face. There was nothing I could do. Like Siddhartha, nothing he could do. So I think it's not that Siddhartha had never seen a sick person, but here he is really confronted with the reality of illness in a very graphic way. You'd think he'd get fed up with going into town by now, but no, there's one further trip. Oh, two further trips then. So the next trip, he goes in with Channa, they go around the town, and he sees a man being carried around on a plank. The man's not moving. First, he doesn't know what he's looking at. What he's looking at is a dead man. The man is being carried to the cemetery, the charnel ground, to be cremated. So Siddhartha has never seen a dead man before. He asks Channa what this is. Channa says, it's a dead man. Will I die? Yes, sire, you will die. Everyone dies. Now again, I'm not convinced that Siddhartha does not know about death. But there is a time, isn't there, when we are really absolutely confronted by our own mortality, when we really realise face to face that we are going to die. And in India, even today, this is what happens. The bodies, a dead body may be carried around in the streets. You can see a dead person. I think I was about 50 before I ever saw a dead body. Even when my father died, I never saw the body. I never saw the body. And it took me a long time to sort of really convince myself that he was dead. It wasn't, as I say, until my 50s when a very dear friend of mine died and had a Buddhist funeral where the body is kind of shown, you see the body, that I really saw a dead body. And I think that that experience was very much like Siddhartha's. I really could see that this person was dead. And that confronted me with my own kind of mortality. I really realised at that point, yep, me, I too, will die. So he's really shocked by these three trips. He's really confronted by old age, sickness and death. It hits home in a very considerable way. He's confronted by suffering, universal suffering. You know, that is what happens to us all. Yet none of us escape it. Old age, sickness and death, you know, it happens. It happens to us all. It's what, in a sense, connects us all. One last trip into town. And on this last trip into town, Siddhartha sees a holy man. So this is a wandering sage, if you like. So in India at this time, and again even today, we see holy men wandering from village to village, perhaps living in the forest, sometimes coming into town. Perhaps carrying, like the Buddha here, a begging bowl, perhaps with a staff. Often wearing rags, just rags. But what is special, what really sticks in Siddhartha's mind, is the fact that this man, dressed in rags, with his begging bowl, with no home, seems very content, even happy, quite placid, very mindful. So this confronts him too, doesn't it? Because Siddhartha has everything. He has the good food, he has the beautiful clothes, a nice drink. But he's not happy. And here is this holy man, the sadhu, who has nothing and appears to be much happier. Okay. So his father is starting to get a bit worried. His father sees that his son is unhappy, and more than unhappy, perhaps even a bit depressed. And his father starts to worry that the wrong prophecy is going to come true. The father is still very determined that Siddhartha should take up the throne and become king, and a great king at that. So that the king's response now is to throw the party to end all parties. Yet says, wow. Or okay, we'll have a big party, and that will cheer you up. Now perhaps that sounds very naive. But it is a confusion that we all make, isn't it? We confuse pleasure with happiness. What Siddhartha lacks is not pleasure. He's had plenty of pleasure. Pleasure is, well, what is pleasure? Pleasure is a sensation you get when you eat something, or you drink something, or you have sex, or you go to a party. It's a sensation. Happiness is something very, very different, isn't it? Happiness doesn't stop when you stop drinking, or you stop eating, or you stop having sex. Happiness is something very deeper that doesn't depend on a particular experience or a particular sensation. But often what we go for is pleasure. And if you live in London like I do, there's plenty of it, isn't there? It's 24/7. Dear old Boris makes sure that there is entertainment all the time. We have endless kind of festivals, and Festival of the Thames. And I just, the London Buddhist Centre is just a couple of miles, probably not even that, from the Olympic site in Stratford. The Olympic site in Stratford. And that's quite amazing. It's quite amazing. Do we remember the Olympics? Do you remember the Olympics? Yeah, we kind of remember them. But they suddenly sort of appeared and then sort of disappeared. Nobody even seems to know how much was spent on it. People say 12 billion, 15 billion, 30 billion. Spent on this thing that lasted a few weeks. Okay, it gave us lots of pleasure, and then it kind of disappears. It just disappears, and where did it go? Anyway, you can probably realise by now that we're all going to end in tears. The party is a complete kind of disaster in the sense that Siddhartha isn't really in the mood for parties. And at the end of the party, Siddhartha wanders around the palace and goes from room to room. And what does he see? Well, you know what happens after parties, don't you? Yeah? There are couples lying over the floor, there's drinks spilt, there's food spilt. It's not a pretty sight, is it? And that's what Siddhartha sees. He sees this not very pretty sight. And actually he's more than that. He's actually kind of quite disgusted by what he sees. And he's disgusted by his own life, which is full of pleasure, but lacks something. Something seriously is missing from his life. And he just is repelled by this endless pleasure that doesn't have meaning. There's real great dissatisfaction in his life. So we too can experience dissatisfaction. Perhaps a time comes in our lives when things just don't seem to fit. We seem squeezed and constrained into something that is just too small, too airless, too dry, too stale. And possibly we are not, in a sense, unhappy, but neither are we happy. There's a sense that life is rather meaningless, a bit senseless, that it doesn't really go anywhere. So this is an experience we can have. Sometimes in our lives, of course, there is real suffering. There is real, genuine suffering. And that motivates us to change. But sometimes it is like Siddhartha. Siddhartha has everything and nothing. So again, I really, it may be that some of us feel we could have more, but actually we live in one of the richest parts of the world. We're not going hungry, are we? We haven't gone hungry today for sure. And I don't think you will on the rest of this retreat. You may not like your room, but we've got a room. I've been in parts of the world where people don't have that, where people aren't sure that they are going to get a meal tomorrow morning. So in a sense, we're probably closer to Siddhartha. So Siddhartha's response to this kind of contradiction in his life between the pleasure and the suffering he sees in the world. And he realizes that no amount of wealth, no amount of pleasure, it doesn't matter how rich he is, none of that is going to stop old age, suffering and death. It's not going to fix it. Yeah, you can be Bill Gates. You're still going to get old, you're still going to get sick, you're still going to die. So there's a huge contradiction in his life. And his response to this is going forth. So what I mean by that is he is driven by these contradictions in his life to change, to radically change his life. So at this point he decides he must leave the palace. So this is something that may happen to us. This act of going forth is something that we may do sometime in our life. Sometimes we're driven by circumstances. Sometimes something may force us to change our lives. But in many cases, it's something else, isn't it? It's that call in the night. It's that strong imperative to change. There is something that says our current situation just doesn't work. We need to move to something that's more meaningful and more substantial. But perhaps what Siddhartha does sounds rather shocking to us. Leaving the palace, leaving his newly born son, leaving his young wife to go on some kind of spiritual adventure. Well, if that appears rather shocking to us, I promise you it would have appeared completely and utterly outrageous in northern India 2,500 years ago. It would be pretty outrageous today in India. The family is the heart, the core of Indian life. So what's this about? So I think what it's about is that Siddhartha is driven to leave what is most precious to him. His family is symbolic of something that he clings to, and yet it is something that he must let go of if he is to move on. So when he goes forth, when he leaves the palace, when he leaves his child, when he leaves his family, and when he leaves his wealth, he's leaving everything that defines him, everything that gives him a sense of security. When he leaves that palace, he's leaving that palace for good. His father isn't going to... He can't come back in a couple of weeks and say, Dad, it didn't really work out. Is it okay if I come back and be king after all? Yeah. No, it's not going to work, is it? Yeah? So as I say, he's leaving, in a sense, he's leaving what is most precious to him. But does he need to be that drastic? Can he not lead a spiritual life and have a family and be a prince as well? Don't they go together? Can't we get all that to kind of work? For Siddhartha, the answer is definitely no. We live in a world of add-ons, yeah? Add-ons? Come across add-ons? You get add-ons for your phone. My internet provider is always phoning me up and saying, you need some add-ons, you need unlimited, you need a higher speed, you need this, you need that, add-ons. So our life is full of add-ons. And we have that kind of add-on mentality. You can have this, and you can add that, and you can add that, and you can add lots of things. You don't have to give anything up. You can always add something. But Siddhartha doesn't have this mentality. He doesn't have the add-on mentality. For him, he has to lead. He has to change and radically change his life. That's That is essential for him. He realises he can't have everything. It doesn't work for him, and it isn't going to work for him. Because what he's seen suffering, and he is determined to find what suffering is about, to understand suffering, and to see, is suffering essential to our lives? Is there a way out of suffering? Or do we just suffer and that's the end of it? So he is convinced that he can't find a solution to the problem of suffering and have a happy family life. They don't go together. In my own life, I spent my early years involved in lots of isms, sort of socialism and Marxism and all of those kind of things. And eventually I decided that I didn't really like any of them, and that the one probably I went for was capitalism. Because capitalism offered me money. There's none of the other thing to do. And power and property and prestige. So I thought I'd go for that and try that one. I mean, the other one's not really working for me. I have to confess that in terms of the power, property and prestige, I didn't do all that well. But I did manage to become an assistant head teacher of a large comprehensive school in North London and have quite a comfortable house in suburbia. But like Siddhartha, I wasn't happy. I'd climbed up the career ladder, I'd filled the bank account, I paid off my mortgage, and I still wasn't happy. I still hadn't found it. Life was busy, but it was rather dull and empty. It was rather meaningless. I couldn't see where I was going, and I couldn't even see that there was a place to go to, not one that had any meaning for me. So I left it. I left that life, I left my job, and I went forth to a very different life. I went forth to a life in which my principles, my aspirations, and my daily life came together, so that they weren't separate things. So that I could live my aspirations, I could work my aspiration. So I ended up working at the London Buddhist Centre, living at the London Buddhist Centre. And as part of that journey, I ended up on a number of occasions at a retreat centre in the mountains in northern Spain. When I say a retreat centre, it's nothing like what you're in here. It's sort of halfway up a mountain. There are no mobile phones, no electricity, no plumbing, no toilets, no air conditioning. In fact, there's not very much at all. A few huts on top of a mountain, and that's about it. First I was rather daunted by that, especially the lack of toilets. Holes in the ground don't really suit me, I have to admit. But after a while, I experienced an absolutely tremendous sense of freedom. A real sense of letting go of all of that stuff that fills my crazy life when I'm in London. The sense of relief was enormous. The sense of release from narrowness and all the constraints of my life. Now, you don't actually need to go and live in a mountain valley. I'm not suggesting that you all give up your careers, leave your family and move to a mountain valley in Spain. If I was, we will probably get headlines in most of the national newspapers, something along the lines of Buddhist cult tells people to give up careers on Christmas retreat, you know, something like that. I'm not aiming for that. We don't need that. So I'm not saying that to you. Let's make that clear. I don't say that to you. But even, you know, here at Sibford, we've got a chance, haven't we? As my trade manager says, we can turn off our mobile phones, we can close our laptops, We can forget about Twitter, we can forget about Facebook, we can forget about the ceaseless chatter of text messages. Yeah, we can do that. And that is the magic of going forth, that taste of freedom, of letting go. Henry David Thoreau says, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. So we're here for all sorts of reasons. I've talked to many of you, and I know some of the reasons you're here. But whatever reason we're for, there's a certain significance, a certain magic in what we're doing. This is not what most of the country are doing. Yeah? It isn't, is it? They're doing something else. We will not be spending Christmas in front of the TV, a DVD. We will not be listening to the Queen's speech. So we've gone in a different direction. And I think we have to appreciate the significance of what we're doing. We've gone down, at least for the period of this retreat, a different path. And we've all decided to do that. I haven't made you come here. You've actually paid money to come here. We've gone down a different path. As Robert Frost talks about two roads diverging in a wood. And he says, I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. Two roads diverging in the wood. I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. In a sense, that's what we've done. We've taken the road less travelled by, and that has a significance. It will make a difference. So there's a magic in this. But magic is a delicate thing. It needs to be cherished and nurtured. Every time you turn on your mobile phone, every time you open your laptop, you break the spell. And we've a chance to go forth from other things too, apart from cyberspace. A chance to go forth from our expectations in a sense. Whenever we do something, there are expectations, aren't there? Some of us have been on this retreat 3, 4, 6, endless. I don't know how many times my trade has been on this retreat, but every retreat is different. Every retreat is different. We don't know what is going to happen on this retreat. I don't know. The team don't know. None of us know what is going to happen. Just as Siddhartha doesn't know when he leaves the palace what is going to happen. You see, going forth is that. You go from something. You don't in a sense go to anything. You leave something, and that in itself has significance. It has a very powerful effect. So we don't in a sense have to go to something. In fact, letting go of those expectations is very powerful. So you've all written down your hopes and fears. And I say, well, maybe you even go forth from those. You just see what happens. You just let it happen. And then you won't be disappointed. We can also go forth from being in a certain way. By that I mean There's always a temptation, isn't there, when you're sitting at breakfast or in the group to be interesting or attractive or spiritual or be something. Well, we don't have to be anything here apart from ourselves. We can let go of that too. Yeah? We don't have to be anything. Yeah? Just be yourself. We can let go of all those habits. Well, probably not all of them, but some of those habits that define us, that constrain us, that limit us. So at this point in the talk, I can hear my mother's voice. So my mother's voice is saying, "That's all very nice, dear. You're going away on this retreat, you'll be sitting on the cushion, you'll be doing lots of meditation, thinking about yourself, talking about yourself, having a nice time, eating nice food, nice people. What about the world? What about that world out there? What about social responsibility? Shouldn't we be trying to save the planet? What about the alfalfa farmers in Uruguay? What are you doing about them?" I didn't know there were any alfalfa farmers in Uruguay, Mother. So why, what about social responsibility? Shouldn't we be out there transforming the world, saving the planet? Well, every time I think about that, I haven't told my mother about this, but I'm reminded of a man who wanted to transform his country. He saw a lot of inequalities in his country. He saw a lot of injustice in his country, and he was absolutely determined to rid his country of these injustices and inequalities and make everybody equal. And he was absolutely determined to do that. Unfortunately, the way he did it meant that Cambodia, which originally had a population of 8 million, after a few years had a population of 6 million. And 2 million of them were dead. And the man's name was Pol Pot. So he had transformed his country, all right? But he'd be responsible for the death of a quarter of the population in the process. Now, I'm not trying to imply that all social activists are mass murderers. But Pol Pot didn't think he'd done anything wrong. He had an ideal, and he'd followed it. There's another man, definitely not a mass murderer, called Ernest Siroli. So Ernest Siroli was an aid worker. He managed a number of NGO schemes in Africa. For 7 years he worked tirelessly in Africa to improve conditions in Africa. And he tells a story about one of these schemes to improve things in Africa, to feed the Africans, to make sure the Africans have plenty to eat. And this took place in Zambia, along the banks of the Zambezi. So he goes with his aid workers to Africa. He wants to improve the agriculture in Africa. So they find this beautiful valley on the banks of Zambezi. Looks very fertile. So they tell the Africans what they ought to do is plant tomatoes. And they've got plenty of Italian tomato seeds, so they tell the Africans they ought to be planting these Italian tomato seeds, and then they'll have lots to eat. The Africans aren't very enthusiastic about this. The Zambians don't really want to do it, so that's not really a problem. They pay the Africans to plant the tomato seeds. And the tomatoes all grow. There's tomatoes growing everywhere. And not only do the tomatoes grow, but they grow enormous. They grow huge, great tomatoes, beautiful tomatoes, fantastic tomatoes. And they're very proud of this. Look what we've done! We've taught the Africans how to grow tomatoes. Isn't that marvellous? Oh, we're clever. Look, we saved the Africans. Really, really lucky to have us around. One night, 200 hippopotamuses come out of the Zambezi River and eat all the tomatoes. So Ernest Cirillo says that in the 7 years that he worked in Africa, he didn't think he achieved anything at all. And he attributes this failure to an inability to kind of listen, to be sensitive. What he did was he imposed his ideas of what was right for the Africans on the Africans. So they just didn't listen. They didn't even try to listen or understand. They just wanted to do what they felt was right and what was good for them. So, what I'm trying to say is that I think for me, as a Buddhist, the most socially responsible thing that I can do is change myself, to transform myself. And when I've done that, then I will be effective in the world. So now I want to go back to the palace. I want to go back to Siddhartha, the Buddha to be. So that's who he is. Leaving the palace in the dead of night, going out into the cold night, leaving his home, his comfort, his family, his status, everything that defines him, leaving the wealth of a young prince. Where is he going? Well, we will discover that. But for him, it is unknown, it's mysterious. It's unknown and unknowable. Just as, in a sense, our being here at Sibford is unknown and unknowable. As I say, even if we've been here half a dozen times, it's still unknowable. Each retreat is unique. It's an adventure. And we need to embrace the beauty of that mystery. Be open to it, surrender to it, and let it transform us. Thank you.
I just want to thank Priyavajra on behalf of us all for what I thought was a very passionate, challenging, moving, even provocative and relevant talk. And I'm hoping that sets the scene for all of our talks. It really both evoked the story of the Buddha and then talked about its immediate effect on us living here and now and on this retreat. I particularly just want to come back to this double vision that Buddhism starts with. It starts with a real confrontation, as Priyavajra is saying, with the facts of life. That Siddhartha, the Buddha to be, sees, as if for the first time, that you will grow old, you will grow sick, and you will die. And that is an ineluctable law in the universe. He really, really sees that. We sort of know and don't know. We live our lives as if it's not really going to happen. So you get the first vision of Buddhism is a real seeing of the facts of life. It's about a confrontation with the facts of life. But it's not just that, because you then get this second vision, which is seeing the wandering holy man. And I think that that's a vision of the possibility of a solution. Not an escape, not a pretense, not some kind of way around it, but the real possibility of a solution, without which you just end up as a sort of nihilist, wouldn't you? You just end up with this awful nightmare endpoint of suffering, old age and death. And that's all that life holds for us. But the Buddha to be sees not only that and really faces that, he sees the possibility of a real solution to suffering. So you could say that Buddhism starts with this double vision, with this vision of suffering, an utterly clear-eyed, straightforward, hard-headed, open-hearted acknowledgement of suffering, of old age, sickness and death, and the hunch of a real solution to that. In other words, a hunch of the end of suffering. So you could say, in a way, that's where the Buddha's life story starts, the Buddha's spiritual journey starts, and perhaps already that's where our own journey has started, that we've got some vision of unsatisfactoriness, we've got some vision of the facts of life, some prevagration that yes, we will grow old, suffer and die, and perhaps even we have some hunch of a real solution. In a way, that's what's embodied in the shrine, is a suggestion of a real solution. So I wanted to thank Priyavajra once more very much for that talk. Thank you. So we're just going to rearrange the room, and then we're going to do our first ritual puja for the retreat.